The European Union. If it were a country, it would be the richest on earth, so here's the history of the EU. It's 1952, 6 years after World War II, and a concept emerges. This concept would lead to the founding of the EU, and the concept was to create a common market for coal and steel. This would mean European nations would depend on each other for resources needed to create the weapons of war. Germany can't build tanks if it doesn't have French steel. That was essentially the concept. They called it the European Coal and Steel Community, and it worked so well that in 1957 the Treaty of Rome was signed. This treaty created the European Economic Community. Instead of just trading coal and steel, now any product or service could be sold between member countries without trade barriers. It also began the European Parliament we know today, but in that time it was more advisory. The 1960s come along and a few interesting things happen. In 1961, the UK, Denmark and Ireland all apply to join, but in 1963, French nationalist leader Charles de Gaulle uses his veto power to stop the applications, believing Britain's interference would challenge French control over the community. In 1967, the merger treaty is signed to combine all the commissions in the EEC into one powerful entity called the Commission of European Communities. The 1970s come around and the UK, Denmark and Ireland finally get to join the European community. Now with Charles de Gaulle out of the way, there's no one around to complain. Norway was to join though, but in the referendum, the Norwegian people rejected joining. Just before the decade ends though, the European monetary system begins to tamper with members' economies, arguably paving the way for the euro. The 1980s comes around with Greece, Spain and Portugal finally deciding to join, and the flag that we've all come to know is finally unveiled. The Single European Act is also created, removing nations' ability to veto on certain issues, while the European Parliament is now empowered. Now we've got to the 90s. This is the most interesting time for the modern EU we know today. This is the decade when the EU was truly created. The Maastricht Treaty was created in 1993, putting together the Coal and Steel Community, the European Economic Community, and the European Atomic Energy Community to create the three pillars of Europe. A lot of community. But the treaty was also really important for one other reason, and that was because it created the euro essentially. It provided the criteria for nation states to have their own currency, and as usual, Britain opted out. 2002 and the euro finally comes into effect, and it was great, until 2009 in which it nearly collapsed, but still, it was good. Also in 2009, the Lisbon Treaty came into effect after years of issues. This treaty created an EU president and a number of other things. Personally for me, the treaty was so complicated it's shocking it even passed a referendum. Oh, and a ton of other countries kind of joined. Sadly, Europe's kind of running out of a bit more room, and as a result, look out Africa. We're coming. So that was the history of the EU. Essentially a union based on complicated treaties and everything changing every 10 to 20 years. So with that, what do you think the next chapter of the history of the EU will be? Tell us in the comments and make sure, subscribe. This was a collaboration video, so if you want any more of my content, please go and look in the description. I will add in my channel.